The number of migrants crossing into Spain by sea from North Africa has doubled in 2017 from last year, outpacing the Libya-Italy route as the fastest-growing entry point to Europe. The United Nations Refugee Agency says the spike is already straining Spain's insufficient migration structures. While the Italian sea route remains the most popular overall, with 59,000 migrants between January and May, up 32% from last year, the Spanish route further west has gathered steam, with nearly 7,000 migrants using it in the same period, a 75% increase from 2016. In June, 1,900 migrants, mostly young men from Guinea, Ivory Coast, Gambia and Cameroon, reached the shores of Andalusia, quadrupling the numbers registered the same month last year. Police in Paris have moved more than 2,000 refugees and migrants off the city's streets. Refugees who had been sleeping rough for weeks in squalid and unsanitary conditions were bused to temporary shelters in school gymnasiums on Friday morning. Hundreds of people are said to have arrived at the Porte de la Chapelle area in northern Paris outside the city's new aid centre for asylum seekers that was opened in November. The operation was the 34th police removal of large numbers of refugees and migrants in the French capital since 2015. Aid workers say France needs to establish an efficient long-term strategy for processing and housing asylum seekers, rather than constantly taking emergency action at the last minute.
We have begun an operation to shelter migrants who live in unworthy conditions, both for their safety and for their health. It was in order to prevent infringements on people's safety, to ensure the security of property, ensure public order, and also to deal with the problem of public insalubrity that the police commissioner, Michel Delpech, issued a decree making it possible to house these men, since they are mostly men, but also the women and children here at La Chapelle.
The various departments, including the City of Paris, have mobilized to offer about 20 reception sites, which should allow us to accommodate all those who need shelter. At the end of last week, we had figures of roughly 1,500 and 2,000 people. We had foreseen that the actual number may be slightly higher and planned accommodations accordingly.
On a des personnes qui sont
Some of these people are in the process of applying for asylum. Others have requested that are currently being processed, but there are also many people who have already applied in another European Union country and who came here either after getting an answer or after being rejected. So there are people who have special administrative cases. We're going to try to work that out and see how to proceed.
In Myanmar, a crop of young designers are using homegrown fashion to preserve the country's sartorial heritage, even as the country is emerging as a manufacturing hub for mass-produced clothes. Let's take a look in our next report.
Made in Myanmar, with a conscience. This designer once toiled as a teenage worker in a factory outside Yangon, churning out clothes. Now she is one of a new crop of designers using homegrown couture as a counter to cheap mass-produced fashion.
We are the one dealing with the consequences of the situations, whatever happens here. So if this, fast fashion and the unethical fashion continues, then we are the ones to be suffering.
Global brands like H&M and Primark have piled into Myanmar since junta rule ended in 2011. Garment exports more than doubled to $1.65 billion last year. But critics say low wages, long hours and weak labor rights mean workers are gaining little. Others fear the flood of low-cost clothes is killing off a centuries-old traditional weaving industry.
Mills are actually dying because there's no market demand anymore. There's no market for them. So they don't have buyers as much as they're supposed to have. So a lot of mills actually closing down.
Myanmar is proud of its traditional clothing, famously worn by democracy hero Aung San Suu Kyi. Today, there are some 50 designers, compared to just 10 in 1994. P-owned Tet Tet Chaw's experience on the factory floor made her determined to open her own boutique and train other women.
start to see some of the things like, you only get to spend like 10 minutes of your time for lunch, and you cannot go to the toilet whenever you want because it would disrupt the production line.
Aiming to make sure workers and local fabrics don't get left behind. Stitch by stitch.
Now, 30 years after the first domain name was registered, Africa now has its own unique domain, .Africa. The African Union Assembly announced the domain launch during the 29th AU Summit in Ethiopia, stating that .Africa domain would bring the continent together as an internet community under one umbrella, creating an opportunity to forge a unique online identity. Some sport now, and football's world governing body FIFA has banned Sudan because of government interference in the sport. A warning was issued last month after the government installed a new FA president. The suspension means that Sudan's 3 clubs in continental tournaments have been disqualified by the Confederation of African Football. Al Hilal and Al Marek have been barred from the Champions League and Al Hilal Obid from the Confederation Cup. It means that Friday's 2 Champions League's final Group A matches featuring Hilal and Marek will no longer go ahead. Now, in some more pleasant football news, the latest ranking list by FIFA reveals that the Pharaohs of Egypt are the continent's best football side when it comes to men's national teams. Despite being tops in Africa, the FIFA Coca-Cola ranking released on Thursday placed Egypt at the 24th position on the global ladder. West African teams have dominated, with 5 countries, namely Senegal, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Ivory Coast and Ghana, making it to the top 10 of the list. World record holder Wade van Niekerk ran the fastest 400-meter time of the year on his return to action at the Diamond League meeting in Lausanne. In his first international 400-meter since breaking the world record in the 2016 Olympic final, the 24-year-old South African won in 43.62 seconds. It beat Michael Johnson's record at this meeting of 43.66 seconds set in 1996. And finally, Gambian students who were twice denied a visa to travel to the US for a robotics competition have finally been given permission to make the trip. The team, made up of 5 teenagers, will attend the first global robotics event in Washington, D.C. with the robot that they built. The competition is open to students aged 15 to 18 from across the globe. Around 158 countries will be represented, including 40 from Africa. Now, just before we go, a reminder of tonight's headlines. 14 civilians mistaken for Boko Haram militants have been killed by Niger's army. At least 10 Egyptian soldiers have been killed following an attack on army checkpoints in northern Sinai. And a military court in the Democratic Republic of Congo charges 8 soldiers with murder following unrest in central Kasai region. Well, that's all for the evening news. We'll be back at the same time on Monday. Have a lovely weekend and we'll see you then.